Wow, Super Flu 2019 seems to be completely over. Everybody seems really relieved, and the death rate was pretty spectacular for a few weeks, but it wasn't that great. But it certainly caused a bit of a whack and a lot of people to reassess what they do. But it's over. So I thought, what better to do than talk about what to do if we ever have another pandemic and you don't have all this fancy gear. So stay tuned. So I probably won't be doing a blog next week. I think the pandemic's over. I'm really glad. It didn't really kill a huge amount of people. Death rate was about 4.5 to 5.5 times the normal flu pandemic death rate, but over about a 2-week period, so it was pretty slamming. We're working hard at work catching up on stuff, catching up on all the surgical cases we didn't do for about 4 or 5 weeks. Nobody I know personally died. I'm kind of grateful about that. And yeah, so what do? Well, I thought, well, this is probably going to be my last week of pandemic videos, so what I'll do is I'll show you what to do if you have this gear, and also if you don't have this gear, because let's face it, most people don't have this gear, right? So the first thing is to know what you're actually quarantining yourself for. So this is a form of quarantine. I'm preventing my mucous membranes from encountering bacteria or viruses or fungi or a few other things that can do things to you from actually getting into my mucous membranes inside of myself. So I'm going to hold it on the outside and then carefully dispose of this. So the first thing to do is, if you have nitrile gloves or something similar and you've got a whole bunch of painter's gear, which is kind of useful if you're doing a lot of work and over a long period of time with somebody who's sick, is you put the glove on and you put this on like this, and then you get somebody to tape this around here. Having done that, you then get a second glove, because gloves actually are not completely waterproof, though you may think they are. And then you put it over the tape and seal it again, because the hands is going to be what the big thing is. Now the new modern gloves are great because they're kind of colourful. So in a pandemic, in quarantining, keep your hands in front of you. Don't keep them touching yourself. Or like this, or like this, or like this, or like this. Once they're on, adjust everything, get it comfortable, then your hands stay in front of you. Hold them out in front of you, except when they're doing stuff with a contaminated person. When you finish, when you want to degown, there's 2 ways of doing this. If you've got alcohol rubs or whatever, I actually would put some alcohol rub on the glove before removal. It's not a technical way of doing it, but people do. So you cut this off and you gently pull stuff off like this. See? What you don't do ever is this. Sounds dramatic, what they do in the movies. What you actually do in reality is don't touch the outside. Gently roll it off. Now you wash your hands before you start this, you wash your hands after you do this, blah 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 blah. Bottom line is, consider everything to be contaminated. So I would probably wash my hands, and I've had lots of water available, or alcohol rinse, and then I would take off the mask. And again, that's how I'm taking the mask off, okay? The outside of this is completely contaminated. What you will see with masks is people wearing them like this. Totally incorrect. Top strap is over the ear, bottom strap below it, and this is pinched in, and you should not be getting any fogging at all. And you have to try all the different types of masks. This works well for me. It doesn't work well for Kitty. She has to use the long stripe ones. You wouldn't take it off like this, but I've seen variations of that. Very contaminated. You don't want to stir the dust up. You don't want to stir any moisture up to then breathe it in. And if you can't hold your breath during the procedure, if you think you've contaminated your hands at any time, stop and wash before you continue to degown. When you take the gown off, avoid touching the outside of the gown. These are not waterproof. These are only here basically to tell you, hey, the outside of this might be contaminated, be careful. So, and then it rolls down. and you take it off from the inside. Stepping back. And then lifting it and gently disposing of it, not going like that. Now the superflu was airborne, which made it very contaminated and spread quickly. But for things like Ebola and diarrhea type in illnesses, it's not airborne. You don't actually need a mask, and putting a mask on puts you at risk of contamination in those situations. All you need really is clothing and gloves. So if you don't have disposable hospital gloves, which by the way you can reuse by putting them in bleach and reusing them, but it isn't recommended, they're not that strong, what you should do is get yourself a bunch of rubber gloves. There's nothing absolutely wrong at all with using old methods. If you look at how nurses and doctors used to treat people in the 1920s, all of that stuff works. So I have my clean gloves. The only difference with these and the other ones is you have to self-inflate, or it's going to be a nightmare getting them on. But again, these are the gloves I would use if I didn't have hospital disposable gloves. Okay? Once they're on, make your adjustments to your clothing. Don't be touching your face. Stay in front of you, not at the side, not on your back, not like this. Keep them in front of you. Okay? The golden rule is to actually keep the gloves in front of your eyes at all times, so you're not accidentally touching surfaces with the glove and then contaminating what's on the glove to there. So you do your care with the patient, and when you've finished with it, it's the same procedure. I'm presuming you haven't got pots of money and billions of these. So when you take these off, you're going to reuse them. So when you take it off, gently, find a sink with a bowl in it that's dedicated only for this. Shush, Becky. Have bleach in it, strong bleach. Put it in. When you take the second one off, keeping it away from you, your hand, if you think this is dirty, wash this hand first. But you shouldn't need to. Shh. When you take the glove off, Becky, shut up. When you take the glove off, the second one's going to be difficult with these types of gloves, which is why hospitals use this single disposable gloves. What you're basically doing is not touching the yellow, just the white. Once you get it off, then drop it in the bleach solution. Leave in the bleach solution, put something on top of the gloves to keep them under the bleach solution when they've been in there half an hour or so. Then go in there with your clean hands and sort the gloves out so they're going to be useful, like this. And then keep them in the bleach solution. When they've been in the bleach solution about an hour to 2 hours to 4 hours, if you can, hang them up in sunlight to solar dry, which will sterilise them, and then you can reuse them. And if every time you use them you do this, you'll notice if there's any breaks in them. If there's any breaks in them, discard and reuse and get another pair. If you don't have another pair, you know this glove's contaminated but this one isn't, you'll try and do most of your contact work with this hand, not this one. Now whatever you're going to wear, sorry Muslims in the audience, get your arms exposed above the elbow. When you wash your hands under running water with soap preferably, with no rings on, I can't get this one off but I need to, get this, shush, seriously. Wash your hands under the tap, wash down like this, okay? Get them dry. Now unless the person's in bed, if you're just going into a room and out of a room, you don't really need the gown on because you're not actually going to touch anything. Now you will get airdrops coming onto your hair and onto your body and onto your clothing, which is why people like to wear gowns, and hospitals use yellow gowns and things like that. They can be paper disposable or they can be cotton. If you don't have that, and I was going to get one and I'm going to get one this week because I think it's a good idea, one of those plastic kitchen pinnies, get 3 or 4 of them cheap. Again, when you take them off carefully and then put them in the bleach solution. You can reuse them. So all you've got is a barrier between you and the person and also for contamination. But I hear you scream, if they're airborne and you don't have N95, what are you going to do? Well, you can hold your breath, but that's not going to work very well. This sort of thing works well, though it's kind of expensive. What this actually is a running or a bike mask. Now if you notice, it's actually designed to allow entry for air and stuff like that into it. So I wouldn't recommend this on its own. But if you have something like this on, and then you get something like this, kind of scary. Hopefully the person's okay with you, but you get a tight-fitting cotton over your face. It's not an N95 mask. It helps a bit. It helps to entrap stuff. By having two layers here, you're less likely to be able to suck in airborne contaminants. And again, when you've finished, gently does it into the bleach. Into the bleach. Now, a basic bandana would work. What I would say though is use two. These soaked in bleach and used carefully are going to be just as good as anything else you're going to buy. And of course you can get stuff like this in most auto car stores. Lots of cloths that you just dip in bleach and clean stuff with, then put in bleach and then hang on dry in the line and make sure they're sterile. You don't have to have disposable stuff. You've got to have stuff that's clean every time you use it. So you need food, you need to be able to shelter in place for a couple of weeks at least. So what we did was we went to the grocery store and we replaced our stuff because we'd used pretty much everything up. So, you know, basics, soy milks, waters, lots of foods you can use, tin foods, all of that stuff's a good idea. We made sure we had plenty of coffee and lots of stuff we can eat if we need to in a pinch, lots of stuff we can eat, lots of stuff the doggies can eat as well. So that's about it. We should all prep for a pandemic, but we should also be very grateful that we're not dead. And it did show how fragile human technology is in this age of wonder and splendor in the internet. I want to finish with just talking about how to actually quarantine yourself and also somebody else at home, because thankfully we didn't really do that. We did it for a couple of days with Kitty, but she couldn't stand my cooking and we broke quarantine, but she wasn't infected because she'd used good precautions at work. So this is from Australia and it's actually a good one, and I'm just going to go through it a bit with you. This is what to do. You have a home quarantine plan in place. So 7 to 10 days isolation. So like I say, you have 2 weeks supply of food and it's a great idea. And make sure that you're not going to run out of tobacco and alcohol if you're addicted to that. Make sure that you're not going to run out of prescription meds. Make sure you can eat this stuff easily even if there's a power failure. Have latex gloves, either disposable hospital ones or a whole bunch of the rubber ones I showed you. Antiseptic wipes are a good idea, but again, just cloth with bleach are going to work just fine. Disposable tissues. The other thing I'd add to this is a whole bunch of garbage bags, strong garbage bags. Make sure you have a lot of them. Make sure you have the capacity to actually have garbage bags open in any room and you can just drop stuff into it. You don't want to be messing around with lids on bins in this type of scenario. Obviously a few thermometers are a good idea, and paracetamol, which of course is the English Australian for Tylenol. Aspirin can have side effects and ibuprofen is not the greatest, so regular Tylenol to reduce fever is a great idea, unless the person's got liver failure anyway. Make sure you've got friends and family that will actually drop food off to you. That's actually really useful. In SARS we had that happen for about 3 months. People did our shopping for us and dropped it off at the door, and that was really helpful. Now if somebody you know is actually sick at home, don't have anybody else visiting the house. Make sure only one person is going to look after the sick person. That should be the person who's the best caregiver. Try to avoid pregnant people getting in contact with flu viruses because there's risks for that. Keep them away, keep them isolated. Like Kitty had her own bedroom, she had her own washroom. That's really the two things you're going to really need to have. You don't want them in a common area. If they are in a common area, you want at least a meat room or away from you, a yard if you're an American, and you should be wearing a face mask. Now on face masks, the N95 are great, And if you have enough of them, I'd actually have the sick person wear the N95 before you go into the room or before they leave the room. It helps entrap the germs on their side of the N95 mask. Cooking, all of that stuff, separate, use disinfectant again. Strong bleach is going to work well for most things, and keep an eye on them, and if they get sick, nurse them up right in bed, plenty of water, and keep a healthy diet as far as you can. Now the face masks are a good one. They talk about nebulizer inhalers, and this is really important if you have an asthmatic. SARS really was spread by asthma treatments for people who had SARS who weren't asthmatic, but the doctors just treated them like they were, and it really made it airborne and made it very, very virulent early on. Now obviously certain types of flu, like the super flu we just had, is also going to be airborne, so you've got to be very, very careful. So read this stuff, make sure it's single use. Again, if you don't have reusable face masks, make sure you wash them very, very well. Keeping the spirits up, that's always an interesting idea. You don't want people getting bored. Kitty got really bored, and she ran out of books, and she got sick of my cooking, and she got really mad at me. So these are some ideas that you can do to deal with that. Reducing boredom while in quarantine at home. Again, try and distract yourself, figure out what you're going to do, make sure you know where you can get help if you need to. These are things you need to remember. So what I would say about quarantining at home is have a plan. The Australians are right on that. Know where the person's coming in, where the person's going out. Make sure that's a single entrance if you possibly can. My original plan in a pandemic was to actually have the infected wannabes stay in the garage, and we have walkie-talkie so we could communicate, and I could leave food outside in the garden and all the rest of it. Of course, it's been so cold, unusually in February, March of this year, that that wasn't a possibility, so Kitty had to be in the warm house. So again, that's something else I'm going to have to think about, is that I've always thought about in terms of power outages. I would heat one room of the house, but obviously if I'm trying to quarantine myself or Kitty, that's going to be really problematic. I need to be able to heat two quite separate rooms of the house, and I hadn't really thought about that. The other one was the dogs. The dogs, you have to keep them away. Cats and dogs, snakes, keep them away from the quarantine person. They can get it on their fur, they can spread it. Obviously in the super flu, dogs were nailed for this in the United States, so we didn't really see much evidence of it up here, of human to dog to human transfer. That did seem to be a bit of a factor in parts of the United States. And from what we can tell, that was a major issue in China. China apparently did organise a massive culling of dogs and cats during this phase, which was kind of interesting because they hadn't really shared what was going on, specifically in Shanghai. Apparently Shanghai got very, very badly infected, and their death rates probably were about 10 to 15 times a normal flu outbreak, which is giving us all some cause of concern, because it should have been fairly standard throughout everywhere given modern heating and modern nutrition, but it wasn't in Shanghai. Shanghai hit 10 to 15% of the normal death rate. Anyway, that's all from me. Pandemic 2019 is over. I'm calling it. I hope you enjoyed it. Do think about getting pandemic stocks in place. We had 2 or 3 totes of stuff, and we kind of went through most of it. So, which is why I'm re-evaluating my personal preps, although I have the ability to get quite a bit of actual hospital grade gear, and I'm certainly going to focus on getting more face masks for that. But I think I'm going to go into the more reusable, more pool shock bleach type treatments, so I'm not going to be generating vast quantities of garbage, because we did have a week or two where the garbage wasn't being picked up, and I can see in a major pandemic that's going to be a critical failure quite early on, is the fact that 1, you're going to run out of gear, and 2, you're going to run out of places to store the waste. Anyway, that's it from me. Remember, in SHTF, tomorrow will always be worse than today unless you prep. So get prepping. Toodles.
Oh, I think I smell alright. Oh, I think I smell alright. Oh, you little kids seem to think you know just